Okay, well, good afternoon. I'm here with Mike Kelly, Planning Manager of North Devon District Council. Mike, you've been involved with the development of the local plan as part of the recent set of planning reforms. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about that role and what it involves?
Yes, my role is Planning Manager. I look after the planning policy side of North Devon and also development management, which is to do with the implementation of the policies that we're working on. And specifically, we are working on a joint local plan with our neighbours, Teignbridge District Council, and that plan will be rolling forward to 2031. And within that local plan, we're obviously looking at allocating strategic sites to accommodate growth in terms particularly of employment and new housing and commercial development. And we're working on a suite of policies that will guide our practitioner colleagues over that period of time.
Yeah, and your work's been of tremendous interest to the built environment industry, particularly because you're pursuing an ecosystem approach within the local plan. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that journey and what you've learnt from that?
Part of the challenge to a practitioner is to try and identify what's particularly important to the local community, what's individual about the particular area that we're working. And we're fortunate in North Devon and Teignbridge that we do have a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve centred on Vaughan Burrows, but effectively the buffer zone, as it's called, covers the entirety of North Devon District and the majority of Teignbridge District. And on that basis, we realise that the environment is an important driver for economic growth, which in itself would be consistent with the government's own growth agenda set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. And on that basis, we've been looking at how we can use the environment to inform our policies, and this has coincided with the government's recognition of the ecosystem services approach, and we're putting the two together, and the challenge is to try and make them work in the context of the spatial planning agenda.
And to do that, what have been the principal tools that you've used?
Well, they've principally been based on the statutory planning system that we have to work to.
Right.
And as such, whilst there are other tools that can be of some value, for example, public engagement tools, mapping tools, we're finding increasingly important, the ones that we've been particularly focused on have been the ones based on regulatory tools. And to give us some examples of those, we've been looking at the environmental impact regulations, we've been looking at CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, we've looking at sustainability appraisals, and to an extent as well on a site-specific basis, other regulatory tools such as the sustainable urban drainage systems.
Right, and in terms of getting the ecosystem approach and ecosystem services framework embedded in that, are there any tools that you've used as part of that process?
Yes, the SA in particular has been particularly important. Now, a number of these tools are quite well known to planners, but what they haven't been placed or contextualised is in the sense of an ecosystem services approach. So when we're looking at an ecosystem services assessment and looking, for example, at a baseline assessment, we recognise that these regulatory tools have a role to play, but it's adding value through their use within the wider context of an ecosystem services approach. And that, of course, has also been recognised in the National Planning Policy Framework itself.
And could you, for the audience, just give an indication of what, in your opinion, is the added value that you get from this process?
It's recognising, traditionally, the planning system has been very good at designating assets and protecting assets. Right. So, for example, I've already mentioned the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. In the area that I work, we've also got the area of outstanding natural beauty, we've got the Exmoor National Park, we've got a marine conservation area. We protect those through the planning system. They've been protected quite effectively over many years, but we've not really looked at them in terms of the benefits for different users. And the ecosystems approach is beginning to realign our thinking to say, what are the benefits that can come from recognising their uses? So it's a change in the perspective. It's using those regulatory tools, but it's changing how they're being used.
How they're being framed. And
yes.
Given that you're working in a political climate with your elected members, I was wondering what what hurdles you face when doing something this new and innovative. Is this been welcomed with open arms, or do you see any problems?
I gave that question some thought because my initial reaction was there were some conceptual hurdles. I'm not sure that is the case. I think most of the planners themselves are technically pretty proficient and they understand the main messages that we've been talking about. I think the challenge is the communication side to elected decision makers and the wide range of stakeholders that we have to deal with. So I think we can accommodate the ideas, the concepts. We can make them work in terms of a written plan. We've then got to translate that awareness and the potential into those that actually make the decisions. And that's getting the messages across to key stakeholders that include particularly elected politicians.
Elected members. And given that you've been doing this process now for about a year or so, is that how long?
Yes, something between 12 months and 18 months, yeah.
What are the key lessons that you've learned as somebody pioneering this approach with?
It's worth pursuing.
Right.
It's well worth pursuing because I don't think it's something that we can afford to ignore. The key lessons, I think, though, are, whilst it's recognised within the environmental professions, the main message to me is communicating that to others involved in the process, particularly the business sector. Business sector, and I've mentioned elected decision makers as well.
Okay. Mike Kelly, thank you very much.
Thank you.